It all started when I was about 15 years old. I was living with my mom and dad. At the time, both my mom and dad were Catholic, and they used to make me go to church with them every Sunday. My dad started to drink. It all started slowly, with him just going to the bar once in a while. When we finally realized something was wrong, he was going out the whole night. He finally got fired from his job, and went in deep debt. One day, my mom decided that enough was enough and left him, taking me to my grandma's house. From that point, we stopped going to church completely. We stood there for some time, and finally some weeks later, we received the news my dad had killed himself by jumping in front of a train in a metro station. My dad's funeral was one of the saddest moments of my life. I loved him a lot, and in the space of less than a year I saw him devolving into that thing. From there on, life was very hard. My mom would work as an attendant at a store, and we moved to a small apartment. I also got a job, and I would study and work every day until I was 18. Even though I had enough age to move out from my house, my mom got seriously ill. I started having to work to bring food home. Mom got diagnosed with Alzheimer's and she was only 43 years old. She got worse and worse by the day. The worst part was that since I had to work, I couldn't keep watching my mom during the day. I ended up getting a cat to keep her company during the day. Wilson was a stray kitten that I got from someone donating it. It was a black cat, and it had a blue eye and a yellow eye. In a Friday, as I was arriving home from work, I found the police outside my apartment building. We lived in a rundown neighborhood, so that wasn't very abnormal. As I got closer, one of the cops stopped me. My mom had hanged herself by jumping from the balcony. So at 23 years old, I had lost both my mom and dad to suicide. I was very depressed, and in the next weeks I had constant suicidal thoughts, even though my grandmother that we used to live with kept calling to check on me every day. I kept working trying to distract myself from all that I felt. If it weren't by Wilson making me company these days, I would have probably killed myself. I hated my work, had no friends and cried every night until I slept. One day at work, I heard two people talking. I worked as a janitor at a store, so it wasn't uncommon for me to listen to people's conversations. They were talking about Ouija boards, and how they would try and play with that. I began thinking about what they said. I asked one of my co-workers what was a Ouija board. He answered that it was a board that people used to contact spirits. I found myself interested on the subject. The perspective of being able to talk to my mom and dad brought me some will to live. I got to the city's library Saturday morning, and started looking for books about it. After a while, I finally found a book talking about the subject. I got it home, and spent the rest of the weekend reading it. On Monday, I called my boss and told him that I wasn't feeling very well. I was lying though. I found a telephone number on the book. It was from a store on a city around 100 miles from my town. I had called there before calling my boss, and they told me that they had an Ouija board for sale there. I got to my car, put Wilson in the car with me, and drove all the way to the other city. I got to the store after some searching. It was inside a building, in the 3rd floor. As I got there, I told it was I who called about the Ouija board. A tall woman pointed to one of the shelves, and there it was, an Ouija board made from wood. I got the board with one hand and kept holding Wilson with the other. Me and the woman stood there, talking for a bit. She said there were people around that region that would gladly do a section of Ouija board with me. A very important rule about Ouija was that it was not meant to be played alone. I passed, since I wanted to see for myself if that was real. I didn't want it to be tricked by anyone. I wasn't sure it would work in the first place. As I was finally about to pay for the board, the woman asked me about the cat. I told her that the cat was a friend. She offered me a deal, trading the cat for the board and some other stuff in the store. I found that very weird. She seemed to really want my cat. A lot of people really admired Wilson because of his ocular heterochromacy, but offering to buy him was a first. I refused it. Then I got the board in my car, and went home. At about 8 p.m. I was ready for my first Ouija section in my own apartment. I turned all the lights off, and started the section alone inside my room. I followed all of the procedures step by step in accord to the book, and nothing happened. As I was about to give up, the plaquette slowly moved to high. I was speechless. It took me some time to make another question. I stood there for quite some time, talking to an entity that identified itself as Duke. It said it was a neutral entity that wished no harm, but was not good. In time, I started feeling tired, as if my energies were being sucked from me. I finally got tired and dismissed the entity, and it went away normally. The rest of the week went by really smoothly. I was going to work every day, and trying to contact my mom or dad as soon as I got home. During the week, I talked with random spirits, some neutral and some not so good. Thankfully the book The Ouija Board from Aleister Crowley had a guide to deal with that situation. One thing I noticed was that during the week I was feeling weaker and weaker as the week progressed. When I left work Friday, I went straight home to try the board one more time. This time, however, I finally got in contact with my dad. As the entity identified itself as my dad, I started making questions only he would answer, and sure enough, all of the questions were answered correctly. After that I started crying, as talking to my dad was a very special moment to me. When I was just about to ask him why did he committed suicide, the fatigue got the best of me, and I ended up passing out in the middle of the session. I woke up later. The whole apartment was in the dark as the candles had all melted. I could feel Wilson lying down by my side. I stood up and turned on all the lights. I decided that I will stop messing with the Ouija board for some days at least. I took a shower and went to sleep. As I woke up the other day, I felt that something was wrong. Wilson was sleeping on top of me. Wilson would sleep in a small pillow bed near my bed, and he slept there his whole life. Besides that, the next days were weird. When I arrived home from work, Wilson wouldn't stop following me. I had this weird feeling of being watched all the time. I had this old computer chair in my room, and every day I would wake up with it turned to me. I remember turning it to the desk every day before I went to sleep. One night right before I went to sleep, I started hearing weird noises coming from the bathroom. It was like a wet towel being dragged through the floor. When I went to check what it was, there was nothing there. I ended up convincing myself that the noise was something wrong with the water tubes in the wall. It was only some nights later that I confirmed that there was something bad going on. I woke up in the middle of the night, and opened my eyes. The light from the street would illuminate part of my room so I could see a bit. Wilson was sleeping on top of me, and suddenly I saw the chair in my room slowly turning to my direction. Wilson stood up and started aggressively hissing to the chair. I was paralyzed by fear, and feeling really bad. My heart felt like it was going to burst inside my chest. Wilson started meowing loudly, and kept hissing. I finally reacted and managed to reach the light switch at the side of my bed. Once the light was on, Wilson seemed to calm down, and that weird feeling I had seconds ago went away. I couldn't sleep that night anymore. The next day, as it was a Saturday, my grandmother called me, and as always, she made an offer for me to go live with her. This time, out of desperation, I finally accepted. She sent one of my uncles to help me move out the very next day. I only managed to sleep that night because I kept all the lights on. When I moved out, the phenomenon didn't follow me, and I stayed living with my grandmother for the next 3 years. I found another job that paid better than the last one, and my grandmother made a deal with me so I could go to the university. Still, I was very depressed when I went to university. I had to move to another apartment and live alone. Well, not exactly alone, since Wilson was with me. Aside from that, I would feel completely isolated, and once again started contemplating suicide. I was making countable sciences at the university, and it was at a calculus class that I met this guy. A young dude, around 5 years younger than me, who I will call Ben. We started talking for a bit, and he was very interested in supernatural related stuff. One day, I actually told him my story with the Ouija board, and he didn't look at me as I was crazy or anything. He then told me he was into Gosha, the study and summoning of demons. At the time, I didn't think bad about it. I had tried to get into Satanism before, because I was under the impression that God had abandoned me, and taken both my parents from me. I only had contact with Ben for 6 months, because when calculus finished, we lost contact. He didn't influence me to get into Gosha, but as soon as the semester ended, I started researching about it. My research even made me go to the university's library and find a book about it. The Solomon's Key was the first real book I read about Gosha. From there, things went crazy pretty fast. I still remember the first time I made a ritual. I gathered all the stuff, and made the ritual inside my own apartment. The apartment where I was living during the university time was much larger than the one I used to live with my mother. It had 2 bedrooms, a corridor, a living room, a kitchen that had a main door in it, and adjacent to the kitchen it had a service area used to wash clothes. From the service area to the kitchen there was a window, even though the service area wasn't a balcony. From the service area there were windows to the outside. I did the ritual inside the living room, because it was the one that had more space. My cat stood inside the circle with me the whole time. So the main way that Gosha works is offering the entity small trades, like carving its symbol on a wall or in a piece of wood, just so that what you asked would be done. I used to ask for small favors like doing good in tests, and wishing better health for my grandmother, who was at the time starting to show signs of Alzheimer. With all of that, however, I wasn't happy. I was still very depressed and still had constant suicidal thoughts. Once, I summoned an entity and asked for one simple thing: happiness. The thing then answered me that what I was asking was over its league, and that I should be prepared to pay a very big price for something like that. I understood what it meant. The next week, I devoted myself to studying a way to make a pact. Now the first thing about making a pact is that it's not just any entity that can make a pact with you. Souls also have different values, and the most important, there is no summoning an entity to do that. The only thing you have to do is wish for the pact, and eventually an entity will contact you. And so, on a Friday I was going back home from the university and it was already about 9 p.m. The street of my apartment complex was completely empty, aside from a man standing right on my way home. As I approached him, he called my name. Anon. I stopped, realizing that I didn't know that dude. I asked who he was. He just said, "I'm the one you're looking for." I stopped and realized what was happening. I won't get into details about the deal, but weirdly enough nobody ever came into the street the whole time we were talking. Also I ended up trading what I thought it was happiness for me, for my own soul. That night I didn't sleep very well. I couldn't forget the man's face, how he had that inhuman grin in his face the whole time. The next week, a lot of things started to change around me. First, I got promoted on my job. Then a girl that I considered very beautiful that would go to classes with me, actually called me to go out with her, even though I hadn't talked to that girl more than 10 words the whole semester. My grandmother's condition seemed to have stabilized a bit, and for the first time since I was 15 years, I felt happiness. One day, I arrived at home from the university at night and strangely, Wilson didn't come to greet me at the door. I started calling him around the house, until I saw him laying on the floor of my bedroom. He was still breathing, but wasn't very responsive. I immediately took him to the vet at night, and the vet determined that the cat had a high fever. They took some blood samples, and after the fever was gone they sent me home with the cat. From that day forward, the cat wasn't so responsive. He would spend most of the day lying down. After some days, the vet called and said the cat had nothing wrong with it. I took him to multiple vets, and all of them made countless exams, but found nothing. Still the cat had constant fevers, and even taking medicines wasn't helping it. It eventually stopped eating, and I had to feed it every day. I thought that the happiness that I asked for wouldn't let something like that happen, but it did. Then one night, I made a ritual contacting an entity. I then asked why was that happening, and the entity didn't answer. After that, when I was close to sleep, I started thinking about what I had done. I ended up realizing that I was tricked. Most of what I asked wasn't going to bring happiness in the long term, and I had forgotten about the one that stood by my side this whole time. I cried a lot that night, and took to the internet to research if there was something that I could do, and I found nothing. At around 3 a.m., a link appeared on top of the results. I couldn't remember correctly what it was, but it was something about salvation being about God and related stuff. But really down under the page, there was a prayer. St. Michael's Archangel Prayer. I was so desperate that I printed that on a piece of paper, got on my knees near Wilson and prayed for the first time since I was 15 years old. The next day, I had to go early for work, and when I arrived from work the cat seemed to be more responsive. He was walking and started to eat. However, at night, I realized something was wrong. I would hear the chairs at the kitchen moving by themselves at night, and by morning, when I went out to check them, they were exactly the way I left them the other day. 2 days later, I received a 2-week notice from my job. I was being fired. Things kept going worse and worse, but I kept praying every night, and threw all the gauche stuff away. Wilson was getting better but still was much debilitated. One night, I arrived home from university and Wilson was once again at the door waiting for me. He almost didn't walk by itself, so I took him to his bed. It was raining heavily outside. I did everything I had to do and went to sleep. Suddenly I wake up with the sound of a thunder. I looked at my side and Wilson wasn't there in his bed. I tried to turn on the lights, but I realized the building was out of energy. I got my cell phone flashlight, and started walking in the apartment calling for Wilson. Then I heard movement at the kitchen. I started shaking, and slowly walked into the kitchen. I illuminated the place, and saw nothing. Then I turned the flashlight in the direction of the window to the service area, and right behind the window I saw that thing. Something horrendous. Its face skin was dark brown, had a big face, and lots of red eyes. It had many horns, and a big mouth open showing lots of pointy teeth. When I saw it, I felt as if my sanity was being drained by that thing. I got close to the main door, and turned the key to unlock it. It unlocked, but when I tried to turn on the handle it was stuck, almost as if something was holding it. The thing then called my name. I looked at the thing again, and it was going through the service area's door and coming towards me. I started crying and shaking. Then I heard something hissing by my side. Wilson appeared, jumped on the table of the kitchen and with a loud aggressive meow, jumped with its paws first on the face of the thing. As soon as it did, the thing backed off. It and Wilson were fighting and making noises in the service area. The door handle suddenly opens, and I ran outside. I stood the whole night outside, being too scared to come back in. When it was morning already, I decided to go inside my apartment. When I did, it looked like a tornado had passed inside it, as everything was thrown around. I finally found Wilson in the living room. Dead. The death of Wilson was the last straw to me. After that, in the same day, I went back to my grandmother's house. I started going to church again, and after some time I was told that there was a way to reverse the pact. To this day I still remember the feeling that I had when I saw that thing, and I still pray and go to church every day. May this story serve as a lesson for you. Happiness is a goal, but you can never reach it. The most you can do is pursue it, and try to be happy as much as you can. God bless you.